continues with the African trade.
Whites must be blamed, not for inventing slavery, but for the monstrous changes in the slave trade caused by their insatiable appetite for slaves. They shipped 20 million guns into Africa, filling the arsenals of the King of Dahomey with weapons bartered for human beings. His palace walls are decorated with scenes of enslavement and torture. And as the transatlantic demand for slaves escalated, a vicious circle developed. The more wars fought, the more slaves taken. This brought in more guns, and that meant more wars. Ketu, in present-day Benin, was one of the areas ravaged by the kings of Dahomey. Its people tried building a defensive trench around the town. Some hid in caves, but nothing could stop the devastation spreading across West Africa. The songs no longer warned of danger, but voiced the fears and resignation of those caught. Elena Asogba Atinkpato learned these songs from her grandmother, who was captured by raiders and bought by a rich man in Ouida to be his wife. Most of the population are descended from slaves or slave traders. Ouida was where the king of Dahomey sold his slaves.
The people in Ouida were basically beneficiaries of the slave trade rather than the victims of it. The Dahomeans regarded Europeans as subordinate, and in particular the resident chief agents, the people who managed the 3 fortified trading posts in Ouida. There was a Portuguese fort, a French fort, and an English fort. The directors of these 3 forts were seen by the kings of Dahomey as, in effect, subordinate officials or chiefs of the Dahomean kingdom.
If they upset the king, he had them deported or killed. When there was war in Europe, the king made the European directors sign a treaty to keep the peace in Ouida and not disrupt the slave trade. And then there were the ceremonies which the Europeans had to attend, showering the king with presents and feasting lavishly, while slaves' heads rolled in mass sacrifice. Even trading for slaves had rules, which every newly arrived captain had to obey.
He couldn't just start trading without getting the permission of the local authorities. European traders arriving in Ouida would first of all have to contact the viceroy, the Dahomean viceroy of Ouida, who had the title of the Yovogon, which means literally the chief of the white men. He was the official who had authority over the white men.
The Black Yovogon allowed no white men to trade until everyone had been paid off, from the king of Dahomey down to the washerwoman who did the Europeans' laundry. The small town of Ouida was responsible for nearly 1/10 of all slave exports across the Atlantic. About 1 million people were force-marched down this road to the waiting ships. Ouida's slave merchants grew rich. Men like Brazilian Francisco Felix de Souza. He took his first 2 sons into the slave trade with him. The family shrine contains his grave and his double bed.
Il avait plus d'une quarantaine de femmes, mais toutes des femmes noires. Il fut père de près de 90 garçons. Les enfants-filles n'étaient pas comptés. C'est un homme qui n'a pas de cœur, non mauvais. Parce que toi, tu es là, tu vois les esclaves en train de partir. Il a même des jumelles. Il suivait ses esclaves depuis sa maison jusqu'à la plage. Ces gens enchaînés, souffrant, pourvu que lui, il ait de l'argent, ça ne lui disait rien. Donc nous ne pouvons pas dire dans ce sens-là qu'il a été bon. Il a été inhumain.
Martine de Souza is not only his direct descendant, she is also a guide at the museum, located in the old Portuguese fort. Martine explains to visitors how the slave trade in Ouida worked and what part her ancestors played in it.
Alors je me sens toujours coupable. Je n'ai pas initié la traite, je ne l'ai pas fait, mais je suis descendante de cet homme-là. Martine, est-ce que tu ne te sens pas gênée? Est-ce que ce n'est pas bizarre aujourd'hui? Ton ancêtre aurait pu vendre mon ancêtre, mais aujourd'hui, tu es mon guide. Alors, qu'est-ce que tu penses de cela?